Kyiv losing its most powerful ally? Is this betrayal a play? And will Zelenskyy finally succumb to the inherent pressure? With Washington and Moscow negotiating behind closed doors, Ukraine finds itself fighting for relevance in its own war. Trump's explosive remarks against Zelenskyy have fueled uncertainty, concerns, and agitations. How does Zelenskyy intend to maneuver his way around this loop between the US, EU, and Russia? It's a high stake for Ukraine. The world is watching. On the other hand, Trump is unapologetic about dictating his stance. This and many more will be explored in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Tabitha Ako. Let's begin. Today, a growing rift between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has sent shock waves through global diplomacy as Washington and Moscow engage in secretive peace talks without Kyiv. A meeting that sparked agitations from Zelenskyy and the EU. Just in, Trump's latest attack on Zelenskyy, calling him a dictator who must move fast or risks losing Ukraine, has fueled concerns among European allies that the US may be setting the stage for a deal that favors Russia. But is Trump's approach a bold strategy to end the war, or a reckless move that undermines Ukraine's sovereignty? Take a look.
Death that's taking place between Russia and Ukraine. It's been going on, and we're going to end it. There's no profit for anyone in having World War III, and you're not so far away from it. I'll tell you right now, you're not so far away. If we would have had this administration for another year, you would have been in World War III, and now it's not going to happen. In the Middle East, I've restored my policy of maximum pressure on Iran, designed to bring peace, to end the horrible war in Ukraine. I've spoken with President Putin and President Zelenskyy, and our teams began negotiations this week in Saudi Arabia. I want to thank Saudi Arabia for that. That was so great. He's being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, yes, sir, to say that he's pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit that only Trump is going to be able to do in the Trump administration. We're going to be able to do it. I think Putin even admitted that. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelenskyy probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I don't know what's the problem, but he hasn't been able. He's very upset.
President Trump there, his remarks have sparked a first storm, with European officials scrambling to interpret whether his words signal a major policy shift. Just days ago, Trump stunned the world by suggesting Ukraine was partly responsible for Russia's 2022 invasion, a claim widely dismissed by global leaders. Now, his latest comments branding President Zelenskyy a dictator and accusing him of prolonging the war for financial gain have left Kyiv furious and European allies uneasy. Could these claims be true? Would Zelenskyy deliberately refuse this outrageous war comes to an end because of some selfish financial gains and military exploitation? Or is Trump being emotionally blackmailing to Zelenskyy? Meanwhile, Trump's speech on his social media referring to Ukraine's postponed elections under martial law as a dictator without election. Doubt down at a separate event, viewing Zelenskyy as keeping the war going to keep the gravy train going, which invariably implies that U.S. military aid has been exploited, and on the contrary, could it mean Trump is pressuring for a re-election in order to project the candidate that best suits his control? Well, how do the Ukrainians feel about this? Let's watch.
I have really bad feeling that future of Ukraine is not really bright right now because of everything we hear in news from Trump. We are really afraid and we a little bit hate him for this war.
It will give for the Putin an opportunity to annex more our territory, just like it was in the Crimea.
I think the biggest disappointment and fear for me to understand that these 3 years was waste of time, that we lose territories, we lose a lot of people, friends, relatives, and nothing changed.
At this point, Zelenskyy hit back, saying no country, not even the US, can force Ukraine to surrender. He further dismissed Trump's claim that his approval rating was just 4%, calling it Russian disinformation being spread in Washington. But Trump's pressure campaign appears to be more than just rhetoric. Just weeks into his presidency, he has overturned years of U.S. policy. Well, fast-tracking direct talks with Putin, with Trump hinting at a possible in-person meeting with Putin this month. The biggest question remains the U.S. negotiating Ukraine's fate, slamming NATO allies for not doing enough for Ukraine, suggesting Ukraine should trade its valuable minerals for security guarantees. Following the meeting earlier this week at Riyadh over Russian-Ukraine peace talks, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov. We are present, leaving out who? Ukraine, NATO leaders, and the European Union, despite their direct stakes in the war. The secrecy surrounding the meeting has fueled speculation that Trump may be preparing to strike a deal that benefits Russia at Ukraine's expense. While this may be in the look, Trump is concerned with ending the war. We all know that. He has projected his ability to be the all-time deliverer. It's perceived that only Trump and the US can resolve this war. Can they? On the contrary, could it mean a bait for Russia's Putin? With his ego being fueled by President Trump, although fears remain of the fate of Ukraine as peace talks continues. Amidst all this, European officials held an emergency summit in Paris, with French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer pushing for a stronger European military support for Ukraine. It's been observed that Europe is pushing forth for a ceasefire deal and have pledged to ensure their support for Ukraine. While in the rift, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz warned that calling Zelenskyy a dictator was false and dangerous. But Trump's Vice President J.D. Vance defended his boss, warning Zelenskyy against bad-mouthing Trump and suggesting Ukraine should be more cooperative if it wants U.S. support. Meanwhile, Moscow is welcoming the shift in tone from Washington. Putin speaking in Moscow hinting that a U.S.-Russia summit was now on the table, but it would take time to build trust. So is Trump's direct diplomacy with Russia a breakthrough for peace or a betrayal for Ukraine? Because Ukraine seems to be in a heated fire of betrayal. On the other hand, one of the biggest controversies in Trump's push for a deal that would give U.S. companies the right to extract Ukraine's critical minerals, a move that some say is an attempt to buy peace at Ukraine's expense. However, Zelenskyy rejected Trump's proposal that Washington receive 50% of Ukraine's lithium and other rare earth metals in exchange for security guarantees, calling it too focused on U.S. interests. Trump insists Ukraine had more or less agreed to the deal and claims the U.S. Treasury Secretary was treated rudely in Kyiv. But critics argue that this is less about securing peace and more about turning Ukraine's fight for survival into a business deal. Is Trump offering a fair trade or pressuring Ukraine to sell out its resources in desperation? Is Europe ready to lead if the US steps back? With Trump pushing for negotiations that many in Ukraine and Europe see as dangerous, EU leaders are scrambling to strengthen their own security strategy. The EU has agreed on a 16th round of sanctions against Russia, targeting its aluminium and oil shipments. Britain is considering sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if the US steps back. Macron and Sturmer will visit Washington next week to discuss whether there are concerns directly with Trump. But can Europe step up if Trump decides to pull back military support for Ukraine? I'm just thinking. Because if the US pushes for a ceasefire on Moscow's terms, what will happen to the remaining Ukrainian-held territories? And with Trump and Putin possibly meeting soon, the biggest question remains: is Ukraine about to be sacrificed for a handshake between Washington and Moscow? We all know that they are the superpowers. Well, looking over to the African continent and the looming wars in Cameroon, Sudan, and the Congo, President Trump's diplomacy in pattern with Russia and Ukraine could mean playing same strategy of dictating his stance to the wars in Africa. However, we can only make predictions, and with high hopes that the US will begin to revisit Africa in the coming weeks. Moving forward, the Biden-era concerns about military underfunding have quickly transformed into a new debate under President Donald Trump. Should the U.S. military budget be dramatically cut, or should defense spending rise to unprecedented levels? As Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth orders deep cuts across the Department of Defense, questions arise about whether this is a necessary efficiency move or a potential risk to national security. The newly revealed memo from Hegseth, dated Tuesday, instructs military leaders to prepare for annual budget cuts of 8% per year for the next 5 years, a move that could slash hundreds of billions of dollars from the Pentagon's $850 billion budget. The only exception, border security. However, just 1 day later, Trump publicly endorsed the House $100 billion increase in defense spending, raising serious concerns about mixed messaging within his administration. Is the White House divided on military spending, or is this a tactical move to reorganize priorities? In the memo, Hegseth explicitly calls for eliminating wasteful diversity, equity and inclusion and climate change programs while focusing on war-term readiness. The plan aligns with Trump and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency DOGE, which has been aggressively working to shrink the federal government through budget cuts and mass layoffs. Pentagon officials, however, aren't convinced. Some of them have raised legal concerns over potential mass firings of civilian defense employees, fearing it could violate federal employment laws and even weaken the military's operational readiness. Could these sudden reductions leave the U.S. military unprepared for future conflicts? The proposed cuts are already facing pushback from key Republican lawmakers who have long advocated for higher defense spending. Senator Roger Wicker, the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, has called for gradually increasing the defense budget to over $1 trillion per year, the opposite of what Hegseth is proposing. Some House Republicans have echoed concerns that Trump's proposed NATO strategy contradicts the budget cut. Trump is urging NATO countries to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, which could dramatically increase military expenditures across Europe. If the US followed that benchmark, its own defense budget would need to exceed $1.2 trillion. Are all these moves strengthening military might or undermining defense? With Trump's administration aggressively pushing for efficiency while simultaneously demanding greater global defense commitment, Critics are saying, is this a smart relocation of resources, or could it create vulnerabilities in America's military strategy? Some argue that trimming the Pentagon's budget is long overdue, especially by cutting bureaucratic waste. Others warn that such deep reductions could leave the U.S. exposed at a time of increasing global tensions, particularly with Russia, China, and Iran. Meanwhile, with the February 24th deadline approaching for military leaders to submit their budget cut proposals, the Pentagon faces tough decisions. Will key defense programs be sacrificed? Will Trump's party push back against the cuts? As the administration struggles to balance fiscal conservatism with military strength, one thing is clear. The future of U.S. defense spending is more uncertain than ever. Well, moving over to a recent development and looking at Trump's trade policy, President Donald Trump has once again shaken global markets with his latest trade policy, a 25% tariff on foreign automobiles, pharmaceutical imports, and semiconductor chips. The decision aimed at protecting American industry is already triggering economic alarm in Europe and Asia, with trading partners warning of potential retaliation. But is this bold economic strategy a necessary step to protect U.S. industry? Or is it the beginning of a global trade war that could harm American businesses and consumers? Since taking office for his second term, President Trump has made it clear that trade protectionism is back at the top of his agenda. In just 4 weeks, he has either implemented or announced a series of tariffs designed to pressure global manufacturers to shift production to the United States. 10% tariff on all exports from China, citing Beijing's failure to stop fentanyl trafficking. 25% tariff on imported steel and aluminum, set to take effect in March, removing exemptions for Canada, Mexico, and the EU. Delayed 25% tariff on Mexican and non-energy Canadian imports, signaling a tougher stance on North American trade. New directive to match foreign tariff rates on a product-by-product basis, a move that could impact hundreds of goods. Now, President Trump is doubling down on his approach with one of the most aggressive moves yet, a sweeping 25% tariff on cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductor chips, three of the world's most critical industries. But how will this impact the global economy? Will it really bring back jobs to America, or is it a ticking time bomb for U.S. consumers and businesses? Take a look.
And higher, and it'll go very substantially higher over a course of a year. But we want to give them time to come in because, as you know, when they come into the United States and they have their plant or factory here, there is no tariff. Well, they did already, as I understand it, reduce their car tariff all the way down to what we have. And a lot of that will take place, and I think some won't do it and some will do it. But the EU had a 10% tax on cars, and now they have a 2.5% tax, which is the exact same as us. So already we've saved a tremendous amount. That would be great. If everybody would do that, then we'd all be on the same playing field. They charge us, we're charging them. And so the EU is, I appreciate that they did this, but, the EU has been very unfair to us. We have a deficit of $350 billion. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products. They don't take almost anything. They take very little. And higher, and it'll go very substantially higher over a course of a year. But we want to give them time to come in because, as you know, when they come into the United States and they have their plant or factory here, there is no tariff. Well, they did already, as I understand it, reduce their car tariff all the way down to what we have. And a lot of that will take place, and I think some won't do it and some will do it. But the EU had a 10% tax on cars, and now they have a 2.5% tax, which is the exact same as us. So already we've saved a tremendous amount. That would be great. If everybody would do that, then we'd all be on the same playing field. They charge us, we're charging them. And so the EU is, I appreciate that they did this, but, the EU has been very unfair to us. We have a deficit of $350 billion. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products. They don't take almost anything. They take very little.
Stand with Ambazonia. Empower ABC Amba TV. We are calling on Ambazonians around the world to unite and uplift ABC Amba TV, Ambazonian Broadcasting Corporation. In this critical time of war, ensuring the station's survival is more important than ever. But what does ABC Amba TV truly represent for Ambazonia?
At the heart of Ambazonia's war of independence, ABC Amba TV stands as a beacon. Years of recolonization, annexation, and French Cameroon's oppressive occupation of the southern Cameroon's Ambazonia have led to our exclusion.
We all know that President Trump has long argued that foreign car manufacturers have been exploiting the U.S. market. The European Union currently charges a 10% tariff on imported U.S. cars, while the U.S. charges just 2.5% on passengers' cars from Europe. Trump says that the disparity is unfair and must be corrected. What are the European officials saying? They have denied making any commitment to reduce tariffs and warn of immediate countermeasures if Trump moves forward with his plan. With millions of cars imported into the U.S. each year, these new tariffs could raise prices for American consumers, making vehicles more expensive at a time when inflation remains a major concern. Will Ford and General Motors benefit, or will foreign retaliation hurt U.S. automakers selling abroad? Will European automakers like BMW and Volkswagen move production to the U.S., or will they cut investment and jobs? Could American consumers be the real losers, facing higher prices and fewer choices in the car market? The stakes are high and the outcome remains uncertain. Trump's decision to slap a 25% tariff on pharmaceutical imports is perhaps the most controversial part of the trade. The U.S. imports billions of dollars worth of medicine from India, China, and the EU, and experts warn that price hikes could hit American patients hard. Will drug companies absorb the cost, or will they pass them on to consumers? Could this disrupt access to critical medications? Will Big Pharma finally shift production to the U.S., or will this create shortages? With millions of Americans relying on affordable prescription drugs, the consequences of these tariffs could be felt in hospitals, pharmacies, and households across the country. Coming over to semiconductor tariffs, strengthening the U.S. or hurting technical giants. The semiconductor industry is the backbone of modern technology, powering everything from smartphones and computers to cars and military equipment. The U.S. relies heavily on imports from Taiwan, South Korea, and China, and these new tariffs could create major disruptions. Trump argues that the tariffs will force chip manufacturers to build factories in the U.S., creating thousands of jobs and reducing dependence on China. But industry leaders warn that the plan could backfire, making chips more expensive and slowing down production for companies like Apple, Tesla, and Boeing. Will this push Intel and Qualcomm to expand U.S. manufacturing, or will it raise costs for the entire tech sector? Could it slow down innovation and make American products less competitive? Will China retaliate by restricting rare earth minerals essential for chip production? The global semiconductor race is already intensifying, and this policy could reshape the entire industry for better or worse. Are we headed for a trade war? Trump's aggressive tariff policy is fueling tensions with key U.S. allies and trading partners. On the other hand, the EU has strengthened retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports, including agriculture and aerospace. China is considering countermeasures on American goods, potentially hitting tech, energy, and consumer products. Canada and Mexico are reviewing trade responses concerned about economic instability. The global market is already reacting to Trump's announcements. Investors are asking, will this strengthen the U.S. economy, or is it setting the stage for a recession? Can America avert a trade war with Europe and China at the same time? How will the stock market respond as companies brace for uncertainty? Trump has long championed an America-first economic agenda, but his latest tariffs could determine the future of global trade for years to come. Is he not plunging the American people into a state of despair? I'm just wondering. Well, his administration insists that these tariffs will pressure other nations to lower their trade barriers, boost U.S. manufacturing, and bring jobs back to American workers. But critics warn that the economic risks are enormous, potentially leading to price hikes, job losses, and a breakdown in international trade relationships. So the biggest question remains, is this Trump's boldest economic move yet? Or the beginning of a global trade war that could spiral out of control? As the world watches and U.S. trading partners prepare their responses, one thing is certain: the stakes have never been higher. Well, coming to the climax of this report, with tariffs targeting key industries, Trump's latest economic move has also set off panic in global markets, as we can only predict if these tough trade policies will force U.S. rivals to back down, or a full-scale trade war that could cripple industries worldwide. Until next time, this is where I'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, tonight we'll be bringing you untold stories with Onyi Okpala, detailing La République du Cameroon's economic crisis, pushing Ambazonian citizens to tea-free, and many more at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day.